colleague, Rabbi Micah Weiss, who is the Assistant Director of Thriving Communities and Tikkun Olam Specialist at Reconstructing Judaism in Philly. And his focus, his specialty is congregation-based social justice work. He's most passionate about supporting racial justice in the Jewish community and beyond. And I have been working with him because the movement has a Tikkun Olam commission, which he is supporting as the staff person devoted to Tikkun Olam in the movement. And so we get to work together, and just had a meeting a couple days ago about that. So welcome everybody who's just arriving. I will turn things over very shortly to Rabbi Micah, and he can take things off. We are recording, so just be aware of that as you're speaking and visible. And you know, if you know of anyone who you think would enjoy this session, who might have, you know, gotten distracted or something, send them a ping right now, because I do think that there are a number of people I would hope would come from Jerusalem who I don't see yet. So hopefully they're just getting themselves connected. And I'll just turn things over to Micah. I'm going to disappear from view, but I will, you know, be here for support if needed. And Micah, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Katie. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to be here with you today. I know the default on Zoom is to be muted when not speaking. But if you are in a place that does not have many active dogs barking in the background, or babies crying, or trucks zooming by, I invite you to come off mute either here and there or the whole time. It can actually, with a small group like this, it can be nice to kind of do a little hmms and laugh at the jokes and hear one another. If it gets to be too much, don't worry. I have host privileges and I can take away your speaking privileges. But I find that sometimes with small groups it works okay if we come off mute a little bit. So let's try it and you know, help each other out. If we hear that someone has a persistent noise, we can gently help them reconnect to the baseline of quiet. I'm really happy to be here with you. We have a nice amount of time until 2:30 for me, 11:30 for you, to do some Torah study. We're going to be talking about reparations, a topic that I am really curious and doing a lot of learning about and really enjoying talking about with Jewish communities and Reconstructionist Jewish communities. I'm going to ask you a quick opening question first, but I'm curious, does anyone here not know anyone else? Like never met before, shared community, and like would love to like meet this new friend through Zoom? Because it's always good. Yes, Michael, is there someone you want to meet, Michael? No, okay. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but just instead of like doing an introduction where everyone knows each other already, I'm just curious if it's a little bold to say, I want to meet Margot, I don't know you. Will you say hi? I'll tell you who I am, or hi.
I think all of us know one another,
okay.
But who we don't know very well is you.
Yeah, we don't know you.
But I can jump in. I can jump in because I actually don't know if I know Madeline, who's who's there. I'm Tala.
Will you introduce yourself to Madeline, then Madeline can introduce themselves?
Sure. Hi, great. Madeline. I'm sure that I feel like maybe I've seen you more on Zoom than in person ever. And I'm Tala Hartzo, and I've been a member of Shalom for a long time. And my mom, Narisa, is also a member, and my family's members. And it's nice to meet you. And I'm in the kitchen with my husband, Chester, and my child, Puck. But they're just participating in the background, I guess.
Nice. Welcome. Madeline, are you open to saying a quick word of introduction back to Tala?
Yeah, sorry. I was having some technical difficulties, so I was like on my phone, and then I switched to my computer. So I think I caught that you were asking people that don't know each other to introduce each other. And Tala just introduced herself to me.
Yeah.
Hi, Tala. I'm Madeline. I've been a member for a couple of years, currently chair of the Tikkun Olam committee, live in near Haight-Ashbury, love Or Shalom and Reconstructionist Judaism.
Thank you, Madeline. Nice to meet you.
All right, if other folks want to make new friends, you can use the private chat, you can set up schmoozes, you can, or socially, okay. Feel free to keep getting to know each other. It's always nice, because we can't, it's a little harder to do the before and after schmooze. But me, you said, who am I? You haven't met me before. So my name is Micah. I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi. I work for the movement. So I live in Philadelphia. I live in West Philadelphia on Lenape land. I go to Kol Tzedek, which is a Reconstructionist synagogue in my neighborhood. It's about a 8-minute walk away. It's really nice. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a Southerner, so I'm living in a different kind of diaspora up here in Philly. But I do love my Philly people. My partner's from Philly, so I have some inherited, or I married into roots, I guess, in this neighborhood or this place. And I have this really cool job where I work in our Thriving Communities Department, where our job is to help Reconstructionist synagogues to thrive as best they can. So so I'm a consultant technically, but the way I think I'm good at my job is by doing a lot of listening and a lot of connecting. And I love putting communities in conversation with one another. I love lifting up the wisdom of our communities, very much in a kind of democratic, Reconstructionist, collaborative spirit. I think we kind of ideally are helping each other to be best. And I'm very much trying our best selves, our best communities, both values-wise, functioning-wise, budget-wise, sometimes it's about balancing a budget, and sometimes it's about governing with integrity, or doing tikkun olam work, as best we can. So I do a lot of that work with racial justice, trying to help facilitate conversations and practices about how to be an anti-racist congregation. I'm sure there's deep wisdom already within this group that I really encourage you to bring out. As much as I love teaching and I have some ideas of what I want to share, we're going to be studying, right, primarily. And so everyone has knowledge in Torah about the text we look at, but also your own life, the society in which we live in, the kind of state of racism and white supremacy in the world around us. Is everyone live in America? Sometimes we have international friends joining us. This is okay. I'm trying to get better to do talking about racism in the Canadian context, but I am very, we now have a Canadian on the Tikkun Olam Commission, but I'm pretty American centric. So it's helpful to have, you certainly don't have to be a citizen. Just if you live in this place, that's great. We're all operating in the same context. Anything else about me? Oh, if you want to hear more about what's going on in the Reconstructionist movement afterwards, and my kids don't wake up from a nap, I'm happy to stay and schmooze beyond the topic of our conversation. And I'm happy to follow up at any time. If you're, whatever next steps Madeline and crew are trying to do around racial justice or otherwise, it's my job to get to talk and be support as best I can. So please feel free to follow up and continue. Anything else you want to know about me? Oh, my pronouns are he, his, and him. And I have identical 20-month-old twins, Eyal and Nadav, who are the ones napping. So there's childcare coverage, don't worry, but it probably won't join at the end.
Wait, your son is named Nadav, like the son of Aaron?
Like the son of Aaron, yes. His name's Nadav Lev. So a more direct hyperlink to the way that gifts were brought to the Mishkan. They were brought Nedivat Lev, with a generous kind of bountiful heart. So it means, yeah. But yes, we did not name Eyal Avihu because it felt, just for those insider Torah story, Nadav and Avihu, sons of Aaron, get burned up by bringing a strange offering of some kind. They didn't quite follow the priestly rules exactly. Maybe they were drunk, who knows? So we are trying to encourage our children to be, in harmonious connection with the divine, but not get burned up in a divine retribution.
And what's the other twin?
Eyal. Eyal means strength or courage. So there's a little kind of chesed and gevura, boundedness and openness, and kind of can they support one another in their twinness. So there's an extra bit of Torah about my children's names. Any other, are there any Eyals or Nadavs in anyone's family? Okay. We thought Eyal was a really common name. We asked like a bunch of non-Jewish friends if they could pronounce it, and they can't. Everyone says Eel. It's really not, so, oh well. I grew up in the South as Michael for the most part, not Micah. So it's a familiar experience. Okay, here's the question I wanted to ask you. Thank you for bearing with my jokes and tangents. My question I wanted to open with, has anyone here personally either given or received reparations? And I'm not going to define reparations for the moment. I'm going to let you kind of self-define for the question. And if you don't quite have personally, I see Elliot, it could also be like a close relative or a friend, but let's start with personally. Elliot, yes, and then Margot.
You want me to talk about it?
Yeah, please. Oh, sorry.
You
yes.
didn't include that in the question.
I didn't. Okay. All right. Reset. Has anyone here received reparations and is willing to say a little bit about it?
I donated to the Shumi Land Trust, which is maybe everybody knows, a Native American organization that has a website where they tell you how much you owe for living on their lands.
Amazing.
I consider that reparations.
Totally. Yeah. So part of the land back movement, or different names, different times. So you have personally enriched your own life and where you live, and have given reparations. Cool. Okay. One of the people.
Can you put that in the chat?
Yeah, Elliot, would you mind putting the name of the organization in the chat? Thank you. I see Sarah Lee Pennington, but I'm not sure if that's both of your names.
It's not. That's Sarah Lee. I'm not the Pennington. I'm Tom. But anyway, we have made a contribution. I don't remember which land trust it is, but it's here in the Bay Area for the Native American. We also got a video, and we have a bumper sticker on our car saying something about rematriate the land. But in any event, my mother was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and she got some kind of reparation money. It wasn't very much, but she got some kind of a monthly stipend that was negotiated, many decades ago. And so I remember that's my connection in my family.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious if anyone else has also received that kind of reparation. I see Margot. That in my family I married into as well. My partner, grandparents were refugees, and yeah, received a stipend monthly from the German government. And we recently received some of that in inheritance, and it helped us buy a home. So there was a kind of a direct upward mobility link for me and my life. Not that alone, certainly also many other benefits of being a white person in this country, and having other moments of accumulated wealth through the class privilege that my people gained. But that was a big part of it that I felt recently through those reparations. Yeah, Margot.
Yeah, my grandfather got the monthly reparations from the German government for the harm that he suffered. He was Austrian. He was an Austrian Jewish communist journalist who was chased out of Berlin and then chased out of France by the Nazis. And so he got that every month until he died. And I've also donated to the land trust at Elliot's urging, the Ohlone Land Trust.
Nice. Oh, I love to see you on both ends, both received and
I never thought of it until Elliot talked about it. So I think just talking about that helps people think about it and maybe take action.
Great. So this is exciting. I've now taught this class. This is the third or fourth time I've taught this. I've made a kind of just personal commitment when people ask me to come and teach something, to the first thing I offer to be about reparations, because I want to be talking about it, like I said. But this is the first community I've been where there's already been active reparations organizing happening. So kol hakavod to Elliot. And it's nice to know that kind of this conversation has already begun, and maybe we're building on it. We're gonna.
I also received something from the German government more than 60 years after the fact. My father's family abandoned a factory in Leipzig in the late 30s, and it wasn't actually until about 2006 or so that anything came of it. And my father, everyone who had left Germany by then was already dead. So it was basically the grandchildren of the owner who got something out of it. And it was always my intent, actually, since I felt that this was the Hebrew word magia doesn't apply to me. And it was always my intent to contribute it to an appropriate cause. And I am still looking for exactly what cause I want to give it to.
Nice. Well, it seems like you might have some collective wisdom here. If you want to have an own Zoom meeting, you could get some good chavrutas, some support in that. I just want to lift up, that was a beautiful story. I see you, Elliot, and then I see you, either Judith or Michael. I want to lift up just one thing from your story, which was that the person who owned the factory that was taken was not the only person who was eligible for reparations, right? It wasn't just once the individual who had been directly harmed had deceased that the benefits in your story were no longer eligible, that the theft still had to be acknowledged intergenerationally and recompense given for it. So that's a really interesting, interesting data point. Thanks. Let's go either Judith or Michael, and then Elliot.
I forgot, it was so long ago. My ex-wife, her mother was full-blooded Tlingit Alaskan Native, and so I don't know how the whole thing worked, but the American government let the natives start a corporation, and so being the daughter of a full-blooded Tlingit, she got a stipend every year from them. So I kind of think that's pretty much reparations, because I don't know, I should read up on that one of these times. It's really interesting when I first learned about it.
Yeah, I think that we should distinguish, and Micah, we should let you teach, but there's a difference between Native Alaskan partnerships and businesses where, these are people that are actually creating wealth and sharing it amongst their tribal members. Yes. That's really different than the concept of being a privileged, person who somehow benefited from the enslavement or the robbery or the imprisonment of others, then giving money back without any, like I've given to the Ohlone Land Trust, and the kind of, and I've also seen my nephews and my son confront my father in wanting him to research the tribal history of land in Michigan that he owns and give it back to the tribal entities that surely should own it. And my dad saying, this is preposterous. There are no tribal entities here. It's a broken chain. Like there is no, tribe to give this to, and they never owned any land anyway, so it was this horrible thing. But anyway, I just think that it would be great, Micah, to define terms and really think about what we're saying, because there are all these different shades of this. Like if you do a wrong and then you make reparations to society, like you do community service because you break a law or harm someone, that's different than reparations too. And so there's a lot of gray area that, and I think it'd be good to get definitions.
Great. Thank you so much, Madeline, for stepping in. That was really helpful for me because I didn't know about any active instances of federal or state reparations to Indigenous folks or tribes. And so it sounds like you were helpful clarifying the kind of difference of profit sharing from reparations, which there have been American reparations paid to the survivors and descendants of Japanese American internment during World War II. In a previous class, we looked it up and calculated inflation, and it was like close to like something $90,000 a person that ended up being paid at one point. But I don't think there have been any federal reparations or maybe some very impressive states to either descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, or for indigenous genocide or land theft, or any other crimes committed against indigenous populations. Thank you for the helpful nodding. It's always, again, all the wisdom in the room. Let's bring it out here. We're going to be talking about well, I think just to be clear, the goal of my class is to spend some time in Torah. We're going to look at the Tanakh, about the Israelite story of liberation, and looking at what role reparations played in that story. And we're going to look at the Talmud, about a story of stolen property, and two different opinions about how to do multi-generation removed restitution, that I think is a model for a Talmudic model for thinking about reparations. And I'll say that I've brought like a lot of like background examples of things I've heard, but I'm not. My intent is not to give you the answer of the best reparations practice, but to root our learning some in Jewish tradition. I'm a rabbi. That's what I can kind of do best, while also, of course, bringing contemporary conversations and values and ethics, as we do as Reconstructionists all the time, to try to maybe start like generating some excitement for a collective path forward. But I do not claim to say that I will be able to tell you at the end what the best individual or synagogue or committee reparations policy is. But I hope we share some good ideas to get excited about maybe something that comes next. And then if you figure it out, as I said, I'm gonna lift you up, and I'm gonna make you tell that story with the whole movement. Because particularly around land back movements and land trust, y'all are doing already amazing work and communicating with each other. And I really want that to get out to other folks as well. I'll just say also, like, living on the East Coast, that it does feel more removed from me, and that, like I said, I live on stolen, occupied Lenape land, but there is not a strong Lenape presence in the immediate area, and so I think that depending on where we are, we will have kind of like different access points and conversations and representative power of indigenous groups. And I happen to personally live in a place with very low representation. But that's my work to do in my other time. Sorry, to figure out those relationships and have help. One of the stories I grew up is growing up in Georgia on Cherokee Indian land, and how that was, anyways, what that was like for me. But I'll save that story for another time. Okay, how do you all feel about diving into the Torah? How does that sound? Okay, great. All right. Anyone ever heard the Israelite story of liberation before? Everyone been to a Passover Seder maybe, or happened to go to shul this week and next week and the week before? Okay.
You think?
Great. But, never know. Maybe this is someone's first time, and so getting to hear, it's a great story. If we had an excuse to tell the whole story, how fun would that be, to get to tell someone one of the most iconic liberation stories of all time? But seeing as everyone's heard it, we're just going to dive right into a very specific part of the story. I am going to put into the chat right now my source sheet. You can, if you want to open this up in your own tab so that you can manipulate the text to be the size that's best for you. I will do some screen sharing. Sorry, 1 second. Let me just make sure that I got the permissions right. Anyone with link can view, great. Okay, here comes the source sheet. I will also screen share, and please, one favor, if I've get stuck on screen sharing and you're like, it would be nice to see each other, just pop up and say, can we take the screen share off? It seems like we're chatting now. So I will try to find that right balance. Any questions before we dive into the Torah? Did I already say that? I think I did. Okay. Oh, I want to say a blessing for Torah study. Just pulling up the words. Thank you for your patience. You are invited, if you would like, to come off of mute with me and bless together. We'll say on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of life in all things, who has sanctified us with obligations and commanded us to study words of Torah. Amen. All right. Here we go. We are on page 2-ish, if you're following along in your own window. The Exodus from Egypt, considering slavery and its aftermath in the Jewish narrative of liberation. And I am just going to make sure. Sorry, I have two screens here, so I have my text here, and I have you here. So if I'm looking, that's what's going on with my head. Okay. All right. So let's see what happened when the Israelites were leaving Egypt. This was in, oh my gosh, I've lost track of where we are. Does anyone know if this is last week or this week when they're actually getting ready to go out, like the night Leil Shmurah, like the night when they're like getting ready to leave out? Was that last week?
Not last week.
It's next week.
I'm glad someone went to shul. I went to the kids service. It was lovely, but they were not very specific.
We had the first 3 or 4 plagues this week, so we'll have the next week.
Next week.
Oh, so it's next week. Okay, great.
Yeah.
This week to come. Thank you. Everyone, you all get 3 bonus stars for knowing exactly where we are in the Torah. All right. Margot, would you be a reader for me? We're going to work primarily in English. Did I even put the Hebrew on the source sheet? I did. We'll reference the Hebrew if we need, especially people with strong Hebrew. Please feel free to bring the Hebrew into the English, but we'll work primarily in English.
I'll do a lot better if we read in English.
Yeah.
As it happened at midnight that Yahweh smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, and he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Get up, get out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go serve your God as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go and bless me also." Keep going.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
And the Egyptians urged the people on to rush to send them out of the land, for they said, "We will all be dead." And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they asked of the Egyptians silver items and gold items and clothing, reparations in advance. And Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they gave them what they asked, and they emptied out the Egyptians.
Okay, so Margot has made an audacious claim. This is reparations. Where on ever did you get that idea? Who could have put that idea in your head? Right. But Margot, play with me a little bit. Tell me more about what you meant by reparations in advance.
Well, I guess it's wrong. It's not really in advance. They've already been enslaved, but they're enforcing their own reparations. They're not asking for reparations. They're just taking them. And we've discussed this in Torah study a couple of times. Like it's implied that God approves of them stealing from the Egyptians. And they say, I've seen it translated different ways, and my Hebrew is not particularly good. And I've seen it translated as borrowed, asked to borrow, or just take. And so it's not really clear whether they stole this or and the whole thing, the whole thing is sort of based on the Israelites being in the situation where they have the choiceless choice. They say they're just going away for 3 days, but they're actually going away forever. So they're actually, since they're slaves, I'm getting balled up in my own logic here, but they are asking for, or maybe stealing money, valuable things in payment perhaps for their subjugation.
Yeah, I'm grateful for every question that you raised from Torah study, because it feels actually kind of core to trying to figure out what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and kind of say that we look to the Torah as Jews for certain models or examples or frameworks within which to kind of read our own life. That like we read kind of the language and poetic expression of Torah. Why do these like crazy stories of dysfunctional families in Genesis get read over and over again? Wouldn't we want to like find a different text and find more well-adjusted? Well, it's like the stories of our people, and they continue, and we find moments of deep humanness and expression that like speak to us, and we're like, oh wow, that is what it means to be a human, or that is the challenge, or I might not want to treat my second-born child exactly that way, but it is still like, wow, I feel how resonant that is. So with Yetziat Mitzrayim, with the liberation from Egypt, we say it twice a day in Hebrew prayers. We have entire week-long festival holidays dedicated to it. It is like in much of our poetry and literature, it is like the paradigm, the Jewish way of thinking about freedom and relationship to servitude and to God and obligation and peoplehood and identity. So it's like the details of the story are a pretty big deal in Judaism. So the question of, did they steal it? Did they take it? Did they ask? Did they coerce? What did God say? All kind of feels like, if we're thinking about like our paradigm of liberation. And I'll also just go and say, it's not just our liberation story, right? Given the proliferation of the Hebrew Bible through Christianity, the spread of Christianity, it has become the paradigmatic liberation story of millions of more people around the world, and specifically in America, the paradigmatic liberation story of African Americans and formerly enslaved folks who have who at different generational moments in different ways adopted it as one framework for liberation as well. So, sorry, the details I think really matter. I think, Margot, I love all your questions. So, where should we dive in first? The question I asked for this text is, I'm curious how you think the Torah characterizes in this place the kind of the taking of reparations. And it seems like you've already had that debate, but does anyone want to weigh in about, like, is there any kind of emotional valence, any kind of characterizing it in any way? How do you read this kind of the Torah's understanding of this here?
My Hebrew isn't that strong, but it looks to me like it's saying that the Egyptians paid the Israelites and that the Israelites escaped Egypt. But maybe I misunderstand.
Let's focus in. We'll get to Hannah just 1 second. Sorry, Joel. Where are you? The way that, how does the Hebrew say they aid them? Is that what you're asking? Oh, sorry, Joel, you're muted.
Isn't there a form of lishalem, to pay, in that? Oh,
it's yisha, the yash ilum.
Oh,
yeah, which is to pay. Yes, exactly.
So that implies that the Egyptians did it of their own free will.
Mm.
Yeah, could be their own free will. It could be that they gave away what they asked for. There's, I'll just point out a few things here. There's, God has a role. Yud He Vav He, Natan et Chen Ha'am B'nei Mitzrayim. God gave them chen, like grace or favor, some kind of favorable disposition. So we can think about that. And then there's what they asked. B'nei Mitzrayim v'yish ilum. We should actually look at another translation here. But the verb that I wanted to lift up here, let's just do this real quick. Genesis 30, sorry, 1 second. Genesis 30, seeing all my tabs. Genesis 31, 36. Genesis 31, 36. Have you ever, this is where the Christians can be really helpful. Oh, it's Exodus, sorry. Let's look at a bunch of different translations to see, for those who are not working with the Hebrew. So we can see what the King, can everyone see this still?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. What am I doing wrong?
You're 31.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong chapter. Thank you all for being patient. Exodus 12:36.
12:36, yeah. Wow, I envy your internet connection. It's like, just click on it.
With that. Okay. The Lord had given the people favor inside of Egypt. So this is English Standard Version. So they let them have what they asked. Thus, here it says they plundered the Egyptians. Let's look at, you want to have a favorite translation? Let's go King James here. So that the Egyptians, that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they despoiled the Egyptians. Interesting. The verb there is a form of ask, sha'al, not shalem, or not nishlam or shalem for paying. We can look at the old King James. And so they lent unto them such things as they required. Interesting. And thus they spoiled the Egyptians. So
what are you asking for?
Yeah.
What about JPS?
Great. Let's find JPS. right. I'm going to do one intertextual thing here real quick. It also seems like you've already done some of this in a previous Torah study, so I don't want to be too redundant. But okay, 12.
In all these, it's clear that God has a role, and
yes,
I mean, that God is the prime mover.
God has some kind of role, but there's also this interaction. So why does God have a role? Let's talk about that for a second. You can, and I invite you to kind of answer the question in two ways. One is or any number of ways. One could be kind of inside, like thinking about the theology of the Bible as it's presented by itself. Or you could think about why did the authors of the Torah write in God's role? Like what was kind of the reason or the strategy for explaining that way? Or what's the internal theology itself for God kind of giving favor and setting this in motion? And we'll look at a few more texts that gives even more to this. We can start with this now. Anyone have a thought?
I have a thought or two.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Connor.
So I look at it with respect to the redactors, the people writing the Torah, and at the time, God was the mover of things, made things happen. But I also see this phrase, the Egyptians found favor, and to me is saying in the same way that it was the Pharaoh's daughter who saved Moses, knowing that Moses was a Hebrew boy baby, and the Egyptians are, to me, understanding the plight of and giving of their own kind of heart, and not being taken from, but rather giving to. That's how I read it.
Nice.
I would say that the role, God's role in this story, in the deliverance, whatever the authors, but that is God's central achievement with the Jewish people. He has said that himself. Of all the things he's done, he is the God who brought us out of Egypt. That is one of the most important attributes of God in God's relationship.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very. It wasn't in the Torah's presentation, right? It's not like God gave Moshe amazing community organizing training, and then Moshe went and built a campaign and found out how city council worked. And sorry, go ahead, Madam.
You can use a more, what do I want to say, transnatural view of God here and say that it was godly that the Egyptians gave them those things. So the Egyptians acted in a godly manner with love in their hearts, or, however. I mean, I don't think of God as, me. I just get very alienated thinking about this, supernatural God. I guess that's why I'm really a Reconstructionist. But so that's how I would read it.
Beautiful. I love that. I mean, I will say I will join you just that personally that comes alive very much, especially, as someone in a contemporary context who really benefits from a pretty Pharaoh-esque regime around me, and who sees myself as kind of, perhaps on the side of needing to figure out how to be a part of or giving reparations from what I've benefited as, being in the good side with Pharaoh, in my contemporary moment. And so, I'm not gonna wait for God to come in with 10 plagues to start working for reparations, right? I'm going to look and discern for the chen within myself, that godliness that will cause me to teach and fight and work for doing a tikkun, on the deep history and blemish of slavery in the land in which I live.
I was thinking, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go. No, it's fine. That was it. Yeah.
I was also just thinking in the moment that there wasn't time for the Egyptians maybe to come to the conclusion that they wanted to give things that were needed for the journey of the Hebrews quickly. So it, like, just practically speaking, I feel like the idea of God coming in to change their hearts, it was because there wasn't time to waste, you know? And then the fact that after that, it says all the translations use pretty powerful words to say that the Hebrews were stripping them of the things that they had identified that they wanted or needed. And I feel like that was to show maybe that God wasn't changing the hearts of the Hebrews in their demands. Like they still were, they didn't lose control over what they were saying because of the willingness of the Egyptians and the change of their hearts. They still had this, they were still like taking what was theirs, which is kind of interesting.
So interesting, right? And who is what, and and I feel like that's part of the, both in the Torah and biblical law in here and contemporary, who is deserved to what, when we're talking about in the Torah 430 years of slavery, right? Generations, and you know, a similarly horrendously long amount of time for both people living in slavery and then the ongoing evolutions of slavery in this country, right? It's a really hard thing to calculate and think about multiple generations of accumulated theft of wealth in this way. So I'm bouncing around a little bit. I wanted to
I just wanted to say that Egypt is a very large country geographically, many times larger than the modern state of Israel. And realistically, most Egyptians could not have been present at the Exodus. Well, and so only, I would assume that only a tiny minority of Egyptians were present to empty their pockets. So I think the story is fanciful.
But my thought on this is, this isn't a story about Egyptians giving out of the goodness of their hearts.
Oh,
you're muted.
Yeah. So the last thing we heard was, this isn't a story about the Egyptians giving from the goodness of your hearts, and then it went on mute. We would love to hear the rest. Oh, not quite yet. 1 second.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Egyptians weren't giving out of the goodness of their hearts, out of a sense of obligation. They were giving because they were terrified that the powerful God was going to send them more plagues and kill all of them.
So there's a really nice tension there between that read and Madeline's reading, right? About like different kind of motivators of human behavior, of collective human behavior. I think both are powerful readings, you know, right? That like, and different tactics of organizing, right? Sometimes the tactic is to put such immense monumental pressure from all angles that whatever the target might be cannot help but capitulate to the demands of the movement, right? I mean, and that, you know, there are different means of social change. I tend to, you know, certainly in the specific of this holiday weekend, tend towards the nonviolent side myself, but let us acknowledge that radical change has happened through many means and that fear has been a part. I'm not sure, you know, like whether or not we want to lift that up as part of the paradigm that we want to translate to our lives is, you know, something worthy of discussion. I'm gonna shift this back to the kind of like the theological for a second, because what I might have misled is I'm not necessarily saying that like the story of the Exodus should be every opponent should be the component of our model of liberation, but let's look at it kind of, I think, what it's saying theologically, but then also like each moment can be a point to either say, wow, I would really love it to look like that, or to say, yeah, I hope that we don't use massive divine fear of godly retribution as a model of what we hope like the ongoing work of liberation in this country looks like. You know, to say like, if I had to do it again, I would have done it with less plagues. You know, that's really a part of the story that I continue to wrestle with or something. And so God willing, we have many less plagues in our day to allow us to get to the you know, whatever the ongoing other side might be. So I'm going to say just a few more things, and then I'll open back up again, and then we'll go to the Talmud. Does that sound okay? All right. So one thing to say is that verb we were looking at of natsal, of emptying out or despoiling them. There's a lot of intertextual references, but I wanted to give one that I think is helpful, which is the story of Yaakov and Lavan. And this is when Yaakov is working his many years trying to get his two sisterly brides. He wanted to marry Rachel, but there was Leah, and so he had to work the more years. And there's this kind of weird anecdote about the offspring of the cattle while he's working as a shepherd. And he makes this deal that he'll get all the spotted cattle. Right? And Lavan thinks it's this like, oh, great deal because there's very few of them, and Jacob's a fool. But then he does magic with sticks and rods, and then like all the cattle born for the next so many years are spotted. And this is the verb, and he despoils Lavan, right? When he reflects on it, he says, God helped me to natsal at Lavan, right? And so it's the same verb here. And I find that story to be kind of helpful because it's like, on the one hand, Lavan he lost wealth, right? On the other hand, in no way did it diminish his standing, right, as a wealthy, influential landowner in the region. He lost some profit. He didn't get exactly as he wanted it to, but he also was already deceptively coming to all this wealth. And so there is some trickery, but there's also kind of he got what he had coming, in that kind of story. So
he sent the wrong daughter, the first time, come on. He's the guy who's going to say, oh, you tricked me. Come on.
Yeah. Yes. And we generally read that story very favorably towards Jacob and non-favorably towards Lavan. Although, of course, we should complicate that at any point. But I think if you're imagining the Torah as having these hyperlinks, I just want you to have that story as one other place where that kind of relationship shows up of God helping one take wealth from another, but in a way that has some kind of, I would say, valence of righteousness in the despoiling. Okay, but just remember, people have been reading and arguing about these texts for thousands of years. There are many readings. It's not to say that one is right and others are wrong. That's one we're reading. I want to show a few more. This isn't the only place the story happens, so I just want to show a few more places real quick. Just in the chapter before, God actually commands the Israelites to do this. When talking to Moshe, saying, "Go and speak to the people and say to them, go ask your neighbors for this gold and silver." So that kind of debate of God and whether it's godliness that we manifest or some kind of commanding God, it just add one more layer here of the Torah being this is a part of God's vision and plan, right? And so if we think about of a paradigm, it's not just that these folks happened to kind of grab some gold and silver because they were resourceful and they dug up a few trinkets on their way. It was that in the whole model that God has set forward, I was you also need to take this with you. What else did I want to say? God promised reparations. Oh, also just to further that point, even before way back at the burning bush in Exodus 3, this was part of the plan too. And God tells Moshe what's all to happen. It includes reparations. Even way back in Genesis, when God tells Abraham that you're going to go down to the land, it's going to be bad for a while, but you're going to come out and be numerous as the stars. God talks about that you'll come out with significant property, with reparations. Why God has, says that they all have to be enslaved in the first place is a question worthy of chewing and being troubled by, but that's there. So just to pause for a second, I'm curious, just the questions I put, how does kind of tracing this, when I'm making the argument that we've seen that there's that reparations is integral to kind of the promise and the plan and the outcome of the Jewish liberation story. How does that is that how you tell it at your Passover's table? Do you feel that, how does that kind of affect this version of the story, this story that is in theory so central to us and our people, when we kind of emphasize that as one of the central components?
I'm going to say this is the first time I've heard, for me, this is the first time that's been named as reparations.
Cool. Yeah, it's not
it's clearly, it looks, as soon as you name it as reparations, it sure looks like reparations. but I never heard it named that before.
Totally, and it's an English word, but there's it's not, this conversation picks up. Like there's a lot of rabbinic conversations about this. There's one about like, well, how much gold was it actually? And there's a rabbinic voice that is very hyperbolic, but says like every person got 60 donkeys laden with gold and silver, which is like not possible, but just this voice, like, it was so much, right? It was so much in a big way. Yeah, Margot.
I know this is kind of pick and choose Judaism, like take this as a model and don't take that as a model. But if you take this as a model of reparations, I think the next time all this gold and silver comes up is when they're building the Mishkan, and it's all like the gold, the gold poles and the gold stuff for the ark and the gold, fasteners and all that. So, I mean, when I think of reparations now, I would like to see, every descendant of slavery gets the equivalent of 40 acres and a mule in some kind of modern context. And I would hate to see that all just get poured into a bunch of churches. It would make so much more sense if it went into some kind of familial wealth and, generational, financial hardihood for the financial welfare of actual African-American families, as opposed to some kind of enrichment of the churches. Although, as they say, I mean,
Margot, can I ask you, you use this phrase pick and choose, like as if it's a bad thing, but I thought that's what we always do. No, I'm serious. Like, am I missing some
No, I
commentary, or, I mean, if we couldn't pick and choose, it would, well, it wouldn't be, we wouldn't be applying it to our current lives. And there'd be a lot of stuff in there that would be like, misogynist, racist.
Yeah, we'd have to stone people for breaking the Sabbath. Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that.
No, I'm totally on board with pick and choose. Totally on board.
So, Margo, I'm gonna accentuate your point, and then Phyllis, hi, I'm gonna get to you 1 second. I'm gonna tell us a quick story. Did you want to go first? You go first, Phyllis, then I'll go. I shouldn't cut you off. Sorry, I got so excited. Oh, can't hear. But we can't hear. Sorry,
You're
Phyllis.
muted.
Phyllis, you're muted. Phyllis, you're muted.
We still want to hear you. Thank you.
There's this, of course, there's this direct link between what you put on the screen from God at the very beginning, talking about the sweep of history from liberation and reparations. That's that's sort of what it is about. The sweep of history, the sweep of Jewish history, and in psychology, there's also this rooted sense that of ruthlessness in getting what you want and then repairing it when you think about babies, sort of emptying a breast and then patting it, or however you think about it. It's very central to psychology. When we talk about guilt, the arrival of guilt, the idea that something was done that was harmful, and then you try to understand it and repair it, or feel bad about it and repair it. I just wanted to speak to that rootedness, both in the Torah and in human development and in the sweep of history.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking it there. Hannah, I'm going to just say one thing about Margot's point about the Mishkan.
But at least that's a positive version of history. There's a lot negative.
Ain't that the truth? Yes. Thanks, Phyllis. I appreciate it. So there's two stories where this gold and silver comes up. One is the Mishkan, and it's so interesting that you picked that up as like one that you were a little worried about, because there's a story that is paradigmatically very worrisome, which is the golden calf. And so that is the story that comes before that is interpreted as being the gold and silver for the calf came from these what we're calling reparations, and it's looked on as incredibly negatively, right? That there's even there's one. This is to get really into it, but there's it says that when the Israelites went out, they were accompanied by an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude of folks. that are interpreted as other oppressed people, slaves of other tribes, Egyptians who got on the liberation wagon and wanted to follow this God, or who had sought shelter with the Israelites on the night of the death of the firstborn, or it was Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives, or it was the magician. You know, there's like all these different stories, but they were, you know, people who came out with the Israelites by tribal descendancy, and together became one new, you know, beautiful mixed people of all different ancestries and backgrounds, which is kind of lifted up as a Torah paradigm for the diversity of Jewish community we have today, meaning we've always been an Aravav. We've never just been like people with two Jewish parents who are both from Poland, and that's all an authentic Jew is. It's like we come from all different places and backgrounds and families, and like even that's the story of the people who, like, you know, wandered in the desert and went into Israel. Okay. But there's one voice that blames the golden calf on the Aravav, kind of a voice of fear of outsiders and dissent, and sees this as like the great calamity that we had all this wealth, and then we spent it on the antithesis what we were supposed to do. Instead of serving God, we made another God. But there's another rabbinic voice that I love that says exactly, well, what did you expect to happen? It's I'm going to send you an article that quotes this, and you have to kind of I'm trying to say if I should tell this inside or outside. I'll tell you the parable. It involves masculine behavior in relationship to sex workers. Okay, there's your disclaimer. So it says, you know, it's a story of a person who has a son who bathed him and perfumed him and fed him food and drink and hung a wallet from his neck and dropped him off at the door of a brothel. And it says, what can this son do but sin? And that's the parable told towards, like, people for 400 years had no agency, no autonomy, no independent wealth, no savings, no food security, no guaranteed shelter. And you send them off in a divine way with excessive wealth. What do you mean? Of course they're going to build a beautiful thing. Like, slavery was awful. You know, how can you say that that is like some terrible failure? That is, like, you know, part of what we might expect for humans to try to figure out what it means to be free, right? To actually have, to not live in fear every moment of one's life, to not know when the state is going to crack down on you to take your life and, you know, build you into a pyramid. And so the analogy is that we don't know what people would do with reparations, right? And that there is this kind of, I'll call like a white savior, nonprofit industrial complex mentality of that it is the people who have to determine what the have-nots, the right behavior, and they should do with their money, with a long history of paternalism and colonialism in there, right? And so it is a little scary that excessive flowing of money could cause harm, could cause golden calves. I don't want anyone in the world where the golden calf is bad, right? I don't want to do harm onto people. And yet, it's probably my decision to make about where the reparations money gets spent. And it was okay, right? Even though there was a golden calf and it was this terrible, calamitous moment in kind of traditional Jewish reading, we still made it to the promised land, you know? Like, we still found our way with much wandering and journeyings and trial and error. Like, there was still, so I think the story, like, it's a human story. It's real. It's messy. But I just say that, you know, that there's like, I want to lift up that voice to say, like, even the golden calf was like, well, when people give an actual opportunity, they might make, you know, some blunders, but that's not necessarily for God. And even God couldn't stop it, right? Even God couldn't stop the golden calf, right? God, whether by choice or distraction, made the space for this people to find their way. All right. I gave a heavy-handed reading, but curious if anyone wants to respond before we go to the Talmud and talk about stolen beams.
Yeah, a question about, or an observation about the role of the Torah. Of course, there's many different perspectives in terms of a paradigm. One view is, you know, that the Torah is not a role model, and that's not its function. It's a narrative. It's our story of how we got here. Or as one of my teachers, Larry Kushner, says, the Torah isn't about what happened, it's about what happens with people.
Nice.
Whereas the Talmud, and this is not an area of my expertise, but the Talmud the discussion, that is more the Jewish source of how we handle things and how we should make correctives and that sort of thing. Yeah.
You couldn't have set me up any better, Tom. I mean, to go to a detailed Talmudic discussion of stolen property, but let's remember Tom's setup for me, and does anyone else want to weigh in before we go to the Talmud detailed discussion? Okay. Again, our goal today is we're learning Lishma, for its own sake, with an eye towards, the world we want to build, the world we want to co-inhabit, the path that we want to be on with our chevra, with our people, our community members. And the Talmud is not going to tell us exactly what to do about reparations, but it's going to give us some interesting insight. All right. Has anyone who here has never before studied a piece of Talmud? All right. Let's say Shehechianu for at least Corey. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Ruach Haolam Shehechianu V'Kiyamanu V'Higianu Lazman Hazeh. Welcome, welcome to the world of the Talmud. Today is not going to be the crash course in the Talmud. Today is going to be a funny legalistic story that we try to play out some parts on. But it's great. I love the Talmud. And we're going to be looking at a section of the Talmud called Nezikin, just damages. It has a whole bunch of other books. It's like torts, which is in secular law. I am not a lawyer. Lawyers, please help me out. But there's like a whole world of Jewish laws of theft and property and damages, and the Talmud goes to town for thousands of pages. This section is specifically about things. Sorry, I had a concise sentence that I wanted to read because I instead of me stumbling through. But instead of having it ready to go. Oh, this chapter of the Talmud is about enactments issued by the sages aimed primarily at the betterment of society, about how they use the rabbinics to try to establish peaceful relations amongst members of a society by making things that are called takanot, which comes from the word taken, like tikkun olam, which is a repair. Great, we can have helps with torts, which are like fixes. The rabbis try to fix problems that the Torah creates, and they say, oh well, it was all there from the beginning. We're not changing the Torah, but they're changing the Torah. Basically, they're playing within the rules. There's an elaborate set of rules, okay, and they're beautiful and complex. But within this legal system, they make changes so that Jewish law can lead to the flourishing and betterment of society, especially places where things are kind of broken. The most famous takana came in the Middle Ages, and it was Rabbeinu Gershom's abolishment of slavery. It didn't come until the Middle Ages. It's kind of like there's a lot of slavery in the Torah, and he didn't just say that like those parts of the Torah don't matter, but he said like in a specific contemporary context with the kind of slavery that we have, it is not permissible in France in this time for Jews to own slaves or something. I should have brushed up on my history of that, but like there's many other takana. Okay, so we're going to look at the takana of a stolen beam. Okay, and I'm going to show you the source in a second, and you should just know that the background is that in terms of stolen property in general, it depends if it was robbery or theft, whether it was done blatantly and the person can see, or whether it was done secretly. But that generally you have to either return the property itself, the thing. So if you steal my iPhone, you have to give me my iPhone back, or if it has been irreparably kind of changed the value of the item itself, and that's the takana. Because according to interpretation of the Torah, in its own words, it would be the item itself, the very item itself. And in some cases, you have to pay a penalty, a double the value, an extra, a doubling of the value on top of the item itself. If that was not the most helpful intro, we can still study the text. I made the mistake of getting kind of deep into the details of theft and stuff beforehand. So let's go to the text and see and I think it'll make sense. How's everyone doing? Is anyone need like a stretch break Do you need to get some water? We got 22 more minutes of formal study. Everyone good to keep going more with some Talmud? Okay. Can I get one like, yeah? Yeah, all right. I saw a verb. Yeah, all right.
I'll be right back.
Great. Yeah, you go. Bad bodies, take care of your bodies. Remember, you're an alive, embodied person. The world, the Zoom screen is a portal to connection and community, but it is not the sum total of the world. Feel your tushy on the chair, whatever it might be. Let's learn some Talmud. All right. So we're in Gittin here. So I'm giving a quote from Rabbi Sharon Brous, who is a rabbi in Los Angeles, to kind of frame where she, in a sermon about reparations, says, our country was built on a stolen beam, except it was several million stolen beams, and they weren't beams, they were human beings. So if the connection wasn't obvious yet about the stolen beams, we're going to be talking about beams, but also with a hyperlink to the contemporary ramifications and aftermath of slavery in the United States. So the topic is Ala Marish Hagazol Shebano. About a stolen beam that was built is the case. Can you read in when it says, what does that mean, a stolen beam that was built? Can someone describe the case in their own terms? It says it a little further on. I thought maybe you could interpret it just from.
It sounds like, oh, go ahead, Deborah.
It seems, thanks. It seems to be saying that the beam was not only stolen, but it's actually built into another building. So it would be complicated to just give it back.
100%, yes. If anyone's a homeowner, as I recently am now, you can't just pull them out. Those joists that the Hell House sits on, the kind of they're foundational to the structure.
Were you asking for how that would apply to our lives right now?
We'll totally get there. Hold that in mind. I just wanted to make sure that we were like the inside case was clear. Someone went to the lumber yard, they grabbed a beam, they built it into a house. It no longer can just be like extricated without the whole house collapsing. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in a Breita. All you need to know about that is that it's quoting a Tanaitic text, so like an early text in the Talmud that has a lot of weight. This is okay. In the case of a stolen beam that was built into a building, Beit Shammai says, okay, so it's case law, all right? Just pause right here, it's case law. We have the case, and now we have two readings. There's two people who are gonna talk, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Anyone heard these names before? Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Great. All right. Some familiar. Hillel, not just Jewish life on campus, but they were like the kind of the two schools of thought who loved to disagree about everything. Infamously, they said that their children they would still encourage to form partnerships with one another. So they shared community, and yet had very vociferously different opinions. I don't know what the analogy would be within your own community. Maybe there's a J Street and a JVP group or something. I don't know, or I don't know. Democrats and Republicans, maybe. I don't know. But they all pay dues to the same community, but they have very different opinions. All right. And
Rabbi Micah, in California, the Democrats are really far to the right. Just to let you know.
Okay, so Democrats and Bay Area residents. How about that? So, I don't know. I'm digging myself into a hole. Let's just let that analogy go. And everyone here, just to be clear, is welcome, regardless of who you voted for. I do hope you voted, but I'm so glad that we're all here. All right. Beit Hillel usually wins, almost always wins, but Beit Shammai is preserved. We want to know the kind of dissenting other opinion, and always has something to teach us. Okay. Beit Shammai says, destroy the entire building and return the beam to its owners, which is like a literal interpretation of the Torah. It says, if you stole that beam, you have to return that beam. And if the Torah says it, then you should do what it says. This is a big deal, after all, the Torah, and we need to follow it according to the letter of the law. Beit Hillel says, you return only the value of the beam due to what's called takanat hashavim. And this is one of those, that takana, an ordinance instituted for the sake of the penitent. Hashadin here, you can hear shuva or teshuva kind of in there, like one who returns or comes back. A bal tshuva is one who finds their way back to a more values-aligned life. So it's a fix of that law for the sake of one who could become penitent. All right, so let's start with Beit Shammai and let's dive right into our contemporary world in reparations. Can someone please play Shammai for us and make an argument for his case, reading this, destroy the building and return the beam, and how it plays. Sorry, we didn't do the building blocks of any questions about the inside text in its own context first? The two positions. Hillel says, so I'll say one more word. Hillel's saying, look, no one's going to destroy their own house to return a piece of stolen lumber. They're just going to live in sin or whatever, because that's an enormously burdensome ask of them. Who would destroy their own house? Maybe they didn't even build the house. Maybe they bought the house. Maybe it was built 100 years ago. Maybe why would someone destroy a house that they're the third owner of to return a beam to the third generation descendant of someone whose lumberyard was robbed one night? And so we're going to make a change, saying that they can change it a little bit, just pay the value of it. They're still accountable for it. There's no position that says it doesn't matter, leave the beam. Time's gone by, who cares? The past is the past. I didn't build the house. I wasn't stolen. No position that says that, just for the record. But Hillel says, let's find another way to deal with it so people will actually be accountable and show up. All right.
I just wanted to point out one thing about that Hillel's position. Even though there is the word about the penitent, I think the focus is on the beam. And the beam, it doesn't say just like pay them a fine or pay them a little like money because something wrong was done. It's the value of the beam. So, and it's because it should be making the person who lost it whole again. Like in the example of your phone breaking, it shouldn't be the broken phone, but maybe that plus the money to make it the right value or whatever.
Cool, great, good point. Thank you. All right, who's going to play Shammai for me? Oh, Tom, you want to do Shammai?
Well, I would say an editor's or variation on Shammai. I don't know that I would say to destroy the building, because you could destroy the beam in the building. If I were being fussy, I might say you might dismantle the building or the part of the building to get to the beam, and then you'll just have the materials to get another beam and then reassemble. So anyway, I would just question that very extreme description.
Great. I've changed my translation to reflect your comment. Thank you, Deborah.
I was going to say I would be happy to play Shammai for this, for however many minutes we have here.
Yes, please. Let's do it.
Okay. So the fact is, because the house includes this stolen beam, the whole house is illegitimate. It is a house which embodies kind of injustice, and no just person could live in it. So we've got it, whether it's taking the whole thing apart or just taking apart enough so that we get the beam out. The only way to make the house a valid house is to get that beam back.
So that would be like the argument for dismantling the police, because the police is an inherently racist organization, because the building blocks of policing, if you go back in history, are built on racist subjugation of other people. So you need to dismantle the whole
enforcing
thing.
Enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act. The origins of policing in America comes from the national legislation to allow people to go into free slates and to capture and return slaves to their owners. National legislation, and that is the origins, and in many ways the ongoing legacy of some policing. So
thanks for filling in and making me sound smarter.
And then also, like, on the Shammai argument in terms of thinking about slavery, I feel like you could characterize Shammai as being literal. So maybe it would go towards if someone were to say you were stolen from your land, literally what would make you whole is if you were returned to your land. Which, and I mean, I guess we did have a period of time in which Liberia was formed, and there were people who were encouraged to colonize or resettle in Africa. So it's kind of a literal, if we were to talk about, I don't know, to me, that's what it made me think of, just literalness.
It made me think about like the whole financial structure of the United States. That was, the whole, cotton, the whole cotton industry that created all that wealth in the South, and the banking industry that supported slave trading. There was so much wealth involved in that. The transportation industries there were all the industries in the United States, and I shouldn't say all, so many industries in the United States. And, so many, like there's been all this reporting about so many colleges were established with money based on selling slaves, and the United States Capitol was partly built by slaves. And, so it's like, if you tried to take out every beam of every building, of every financial institution, of every social structure in the United States that somehow was dependent on slaves or the slave trade or the finances of the slave trade, I don't know how that would be possible. And in the West more, or well, I guess it's all over the country, but out here, if you tried to to return native lands would mean
Look at the recent Supreme Court ruling about Nevada.
I saw that.
Or no, Oklahoma. It's Oklahoma.
Yeah. Where they actually own the land, and the judge was like, I don't care what happened after that. This land was stolen. So if those kind of, if you did that all over the United States, I don't know what would happen to the whole financial, economic, social structure of the United States. So it's kind of mind blowing.
It is, and Shammai says, yeah, that's the point. That's why you're not supposed to steal beams, right? Because the Torah says you have to return the things that you steal, and there will be major repercussions for building houses. Yeah, the house will collapse. That's exactly what I'm saying.
It's
right.
It's one thing to, in the first instance, when the thief of the beam is still there, you can say, well, we caught you. You stole the beam. You built a house, so you're gonna pay. But after over time, that person is dead, and their children are dead, and decades and centuries later, you have entirely different parties, and it doesn't really make sense to say to somebody who was not part of the original transaction to say, well, okay, because of this thing that happened hundreds of years ago, we're taking away your house. And it's like, well, now you're creating a new injustice to destroy an old injustice.
I hear you, Joel, except, and I see Phyllis after me, except Shammai doesn't say up to 30 years after the theft of the beam. There's no statute of limitations. Right, so this is why I think, just to say, we have Shammai. We're Joel and Margaret, we're doing a good job of kind of transitioning to the Hillel world, and why we have Takanot, right? But I just want to say, like, Shammai stays there, so we have to engage with his position, right? Where we have to say, okay, but what actually would it look like to imagine a world where we tried to, as much as possible, dismantle every oppressive system that has its roots in either indigenous genocide or the transatlantic slave trade. Like what would, before we go to Hillel, what would a world look like where we actually did all that? Now, we live in a Hillel world, okay? So we're gonna go to Hillel now after Phyllis gets her comment in, but I feel like Shammai obliges us, right, to say, like, I do not, as much as I have been excited about the Black Lives Matter movement over the past 5 years and over this summer, I do not think, also just given how the Biden administration is presenting itself, that massive dismantling of the police in this country is going to be happening right now. My wife, who's a social worker, is working on with the Philly City Council on having more robust mental health services, and even moving away from a co-responder model in mental health crises, so that there are independent emergency crisis responses. This is already more prevalent on the West Coast, that will come through when folks call 911 for help with a mental health crisis. That is abolishing the police, except it's not actually saying that every police officer, has to go away. It's about community reinvestment in new services. So to me, that's kind of more of like a Hillel world. But I do enjoy thinking for a second, wow, what would the world look like if there weren't people walking around with guns on my block all the time, who were empowered by the state to kill citizens, and at times. We play with Shammai. Okay, Phyllis, your world. Do you want to take us to Hillel, or do you want to stay with Shammai? Oh, you're on mute again. Sorry.
Phyllis, you're muted.
Sorry, Phyllis. If I got to learn how to lip read, it'd be so helpful. I could.
Sorry.
You're good.
On the other hand, returning the beam, what does that do? I mean, the robber was able to create wealth from that beam, a house, a life for his family. Returning a simple beam, what do you do with a simple beam? It doesn't capture the enormity of what was lost and what it meant to generations, etc., the building of wealth. So in a certain sense, then 40 acres and a mule, I mean, that was an arbitrary thing that they said. It's not, it doesn't necessarily deal with the enormity of what happened.
Totally, yes. And I think that is, in that way we could say, Hillel, maybe you're not quite taking us far enough too. Like maybe there is some, I have to acknowledge about the accumulated interest and value and everything that could have been built and caused other things to be built from that beam that was taken away at that time. I'm going to give it to Elliot, and then I'm going to close us with the story. There's always more to say, but yeah, Elliot.
There's one thing that bothers me. I don't know if that's the right word, about this whole, the discussion between the two sides, and none of it includes what the person who was wronged wants.
Nice. Great. I love that. And so I think it also, gives us an opening to rethink. To me, that feels like a restorative justice kind of approach, right? Where it's not like a court in this country is limited, to enforcing the laws in the book, but when, different questions are asked and different possibilities arise of what healing looks like in a more systemic level, and people ask what they need, transformation can really be possible in different ways. When it's not just like the beam. So what I love about your comment, Elliot, is like, what's the question that's not being asked by the questions that are not being asked by this text, that are not being considered?
I think it's what leads people to worrying, oh my God, what's going to happen? They're going to want everything, or, we'll have no more banks or something. And, if we give all the land back to the native people, but probably most native people don't want all the banks to close and don't want San Francisco to be, torn down. But, we don't know. We'd have to ask them what they want.
Yeah. Georgetown, Margot, I think, talked about Ivy League universities being built by slaves. Georgetown in the past few years did a pretty public nod towards reparations, where they found that the university had owned 230 or so slaves at one point, and they did a whole series of things of renaming campus buildings, and publicly acknowledging and apologizing for owning slaves. But the one that I thought was really interesting is that they did genealogical research of everyone who had either been owned by the university or whose ancestors had helped build or benefit the university enslavement, and they offered all of those people what's it called, like alumni privileges. Like if your daddy went to Georgetown, you get special privileges. Is there a word for that? I don't know, like nepotism or
legacy something.
Legacy, yeah. They offered all the descendants legacy admission status to Georgetown as well, as a nod towards reparations. So they didn't abolish the entire university. They probably could have done more. They gave some money, but like in a kind of Hillel kind of world, trying to figure out what symbolic gestures and statuses did they have that could be conferred in a way to try to begin, making up the price of the beam. I'm not saying we should let Georgetown off the hook, and it's now great. I mean, they still have a lot to grapple with, but just one kind of example of people trying to find another path.
Yeah, maybe Elliot's question should be asked in every conversation like that. Like, did Georgetown do that? Did Georgetown ask the descendants of those slaves what they wanted?
Yeah, because if you don't sit down with people and talk to them, you're still maintaining that same power structure. You're still saying, oh, I'm up here and I'm going to give you this, instead of like writing the structure. And do you see what I'm trying to say?
I think the Hillel method gives the flexibility to have another person receive the reparation than the original, and also to have the framing of what it looks like be more creative too. It's not so literal.
Yeah, because we have to be creative in this situation. Like there's creativity is going to be key in solving this.
There are a lot of reparations conversations and resources about reparations. The one I'm going to lift up in the spirit of Elliot's question is the Movement for Black Lives has like 100-page reparations now toolkit to guide kind of like policy and conversation reparations. I think it's one of many great resources, but particularly by an organization that is centered around the people who are descendants of enslaved Africans in this country. A great place to go to kind of start by centering their voices and kind of visions in this work. Someday I will have all the resources about reparations in one folder ready to go, but I give that to you. Okay, so two things in closing. One is that I'm excited that the Reconstructionist movement is talking about reparations. The Rabbinical Association that Rabbi Katie and myself are a part of are on the cusp of probably passing a resolution around reparations, endorsing HR 40, the congressional legislation to explore reparations, and as well as other endorsements. The Kulam Commission, I think, will likely begin starts movement-wide conversations about what that would look like for all congregations to be working on as well. It's not, as we are a democratic movement, it's not for me to say that gets to be worked on. There's much process, but please stay in touch. I hear that you all are thinking about this already, working on this together, especially if today you were like, I do not agree with half the things that Rabbi Micah said. That's really important for me to hear as well, especially the folks who didn't get to speak a lot. I would love to hear your voice. I would love to hear what you think obstacles or challenges might be for ongoing conversation and collective work around this together. I certainly came in, with a lot of enthusiasm for this, but we're going to need to all be in this together, because whatever you're thinking, surely someone else in the movement is going to be thinking that as well. And it's good that we think about that both as organizers and as community members who are trying to be accountable to one another. The story I was going to close with was a rabbinic story about the Torah, where it imagines a world where it's everyone living under Alexander the Great and Greek times, and the Egyptians sue the Israelites in Greek court for the theft of the gold and silver as they were leaving slavery. And they bring a lawyer before Alexander the Great, and who argues on behalf of the Egyptians, and he quotes the Torah, and he says, look, they stole our gold. They have to pay it back. Now we're under, you know, it's a time, I guess, the decline of the Egyptians. So they're the world power and they can impose penalties. And it looks kind of bad for the Israelites. They're about to be, you know, punished for this. And the Jews, the Israelites, whatever, lawyer also quotes the Torah and says, I will bring the same source to back us. And it quotes, and the Israelites were enslaved for 430 years in Egypt. And so their point is like, they had 430 years of free labor for us. What should they pay us for that? And so the question is, well, how are you going to, you know, how are you going to pay them for that 430 years of labor? And the Egyptians are silent and they say, give us some time. And 3 days later, they come back and they like leave the area and leave them all their fields, which are like laden with fruit and produce. And it's in a Shemitah year, in a 7th year. And it's this like kind of sweet thing where like the 7th year in biblical law, you know, you're not allowed to cultivate food. The land lies fallow and God somehow will provide extra bounty. And so it's like a story where they get even more reparations, right? Many generations later, in this Greek court, it's brought up again. And instead of saying, oh no, you shouldn't have gotten it, they say, you should get even more because that didn't even get close enough to covering all those years of unpaid labor. Just one more little Jewish story that I really enjoy, the rabbis imagining this world and thinking about how the legacy of this story lives on in generation to generation. I'm going to formally close this. Sorry for being 5 minutes over. I am going to just briefly listen at the door to see if there's what the status of NAP is, and I would be so happy to come back and schmooze about how you're doing, the movement, anything else. Thank you so much for joining me on a Sunday morning and studying Torah together. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Rabbi Katie.
Hi, Rabbi Katie.
I'm going to put my email in the chat, Reconstructionists.org. Please feel free to follow up. And I'm also going to put, if you want, a few recommended follow-up. These were kind of 3 pieces, and I'll put a 4th that I thought that I thought a lot about and drew from in this class. I particularly drew from in the Torah conversation this piece by Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein. It's published on Evolve, the kind of Reconstructionist thought platform that you can go to for some follow-up reading if you want. Always fun to learn more. All right.
Thank you so much for this session. I'm sure that every one of us would say it was super juicy, and we really appreciate your presence and all that you shared. And this will be an important piece as we continue this exploration at Or Shalom.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.